Hello, Siegfried here, and today I'm going to tell you what I think about creationism and science. This is another topic requested by my friend Cyprian, so I'm going to do my best to address it. I'm also going to try to keep this one a bit short, although there's a lot I could say on the subject. We'll see how I do. Okay, to start out with, I think it's a little bit of a mixed bag. Creationism and science are not necessarily opposed to one another. And I don't think we can really talk about creationism without talking about science and religion in general. So I'm going to start at this general level, and then I'm going to try and bring it back. We're going to talk a little bit more about creationism. So first of all, let's compare the disciplines of science and the disciplines of religion and the role they play in human society. What is the same between them? Well, I would say what's the same is the goal of these institutions in a very general sense. They both are there to kind of help human beings contemplate the nature of the reality around us. What is it? How does it work? And then use that information in order to make our lives better. Now, they're very different in the methodologies and the mechanisms by which they do that. So religion, of course, is, I would say, primarily a discipline of revealed truth. The idea is that there is an all-powerful God of some kind, and this God reveals information to his chosen people through visions, or through feelings, or through golden tablets, or whatever it happens to be. These ideas are then shared from one person to another person, and this becomes the basis of religious view and an understanding of the divine. And because the divine created everything around us, it also helps us understand that. Now, science, on the other hand, is a system of empirical observation in which we gain knowledge by looking, listening, using our senses in order to look at the things around us. We form a hypothesis, an idea. Why is this happening? Then we create an experiment to test whether or not this hypothesis is true. So we have to use logic and reasoning. We have to use observation, careful measurements of the things that we are seeing. And by using this methodology, we build a reliable set of information about the world around us. Now, religion is usually mostly concerned with good and bad behaviors, right and wrong moral questions. And so it seeks to make our lives better by giving us an understanding of what is good and right, and what is wrong and bad. And so we follow the good things and our life will be better. We follow the bad things, our life will be worse. Science is not as interested in morality. It's interested in more practical questions. So if I want to cut down a tree, what is the fastest and most effective way to do that? What will happen if I kill all the birds in this area? Will that be good for me, or will it be bad for me in terms of growing food? We have some practical application that we want to apply. Science helps us understand the world. Then we can predict the outcome of actions, or we can find the most efficient way to accomplish some kind of a goal. And that's really where science is leading us. So they really diverge in terms of their ultimate ends. However, we as human beings still want to know about things in the world around us, such as how did life come here? Maybe we don't have a practical use for that in science, and maybe it doesn't really have a lot to do with the moral choices that we make in life, but we're interested in it. So we're going to use these knowledge systems in order to try and find out the answers to these questions. And here it's that methodology that really becomes important. Revealed truth, God touched our minds and gave us this information, or empirical evidence. We look and we test and we experiment and we see what holds true, and then we extrapolate that knowledge to answer questions about things we can't observe. We cannot observe the evolution or the creation of life on Earth, and we have to extrapolate that from what we can observe and hope that the empirical truths that we see in the world today were also the empirical truths in the past. This is where philosophy really comes into play. What is knowledge? What knowledge is useful? What knowledge is true? Now, personally, I come down on the side of science and rationalism. I think revealed truth is an incredibly iffy way to gain knowledge. Different people have different visions from different gods, they have wildly different conclusions, wildly different claims. Science tends to narrow to a single consensus because ultimately you can go out and do the experiment yourself, and you can see, and then we can all look and share our observations. We get a less personal, a less subjective view of the world this way, which is ironic because, well, religious institutions tend to think they're more objective. But because I have such wild disagreement with this methodology, well, I tend not to trust it. If somebody said to you, I'm going to fly this plane from New York to Denver, okay, are you a trained pilot? No, but I had a vision from God, and so I know how to do it. Well, no thank you. I'll pass. Now, you went to pilot training, and you flew many planes before. You have empirical proof of the techniques that you're going to do are going to work. Great. I have a lot more trust in that, and that's the way I see just about everything. So if you just tell me it was a vision from God, I'm going to take that with a huge grain of salt. But I'm not telling you can't do that. It's not my place to say. So just say what I think and not what you should think. All right. So let's talk about creationism specifically. So most religious institutions have some kind of text or history or tradition about how the universe started. It's something we're interested in. It makes for a great story. Any story needs to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. That is our natural sense of narrative. It's the structure of our lives. And so when we ask what is the nature of reality, it needs to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. On science, we don't use human storytelling and experience as a basis for rational understanding, so maybe the universe never has an end. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. And some religions also have this view that the world is a cyclical nature. It doesn't have a beginning and the end, but they usually do have cycles, and the cycles will have a beginning and an end, and that's kind of the same idea. So that's creationism. And where do they come into conflict? Well, the real problem is when our rational observation, our empirical observation of the world tells us that the tradition of a particular religion is basically impossible or contradicts with the well-understood science of how things happen, and then they come into conflict. Generally speaking, it's the religious people that get upset and threatened by the idea of the empirical information. And they're like, no, this is going to take people away from our religion, so we have to stop these ideas. They can't be correct, and so they attack the science. The fundamentalist movement in America is a good example of this, but it's only one of many. Now, it is true that sometimes science will attack religion. For some reason, people have a problem with a religious view or perspective. They think it's immoral, or they don't like the way it is, or they just hate when the idea that anybody thinks differently from them, and so they will use empirical science to attack religion. I try not to do that unless I am in a context of people who want to debate and argue, truth seek, and that kind of thing. Otherwise, I try to avoid it for the most part, because it's just none of my business. I don't want to interrupt your faith and how you live your life. Now, I do think these things could be compatible. You have what they call God of the gaps. That's where if science and empirical information can't give you an answer, you say, well, God did it. Some people hate that because logically and rationally there's some weakness to saying this is a claim of truth. But I really don't care. I mean, if we don't know what's happening, you can imagine any story you like to fill in the blanks, and that's great so long as it makes you happy. Now, if we do come up with hard information that it's wrong, I would hope you would listen, because if there is a God, and God created the universe, then I think you could learn a lot by observing this. The universe that he created, or she, or whatever, would be more factual than what your neighbor says he had a vision from said God and that they told him last Thursday night. Or even if that happened 2,000 years ago or whatever, right? I mean, the nature of reality is reality. God gave you eyes, he gave you ears, he gave you the ability to take in this information. Why are you ignoring it? So I really have a big problem with religious people who deny empirical information only because it contradicts the beliefs that they personally have about the text that they read, about the vision that somebody else had, and so on and so forth. Now, when there's no conflict, I say, why not? Think whatever you want. I mean, science uses hypothesis. We use our imagination to come up with a possibility, and then we test it. I think that's a pretty good method. Now, I will say, this is not 100%. There's a long history of religious people using scientific methods. Monks, Catholic monks are famous for using science and maybe being the birthplace of the idea of science and the natural method. They discovered things about inheritance and about our world by observation. So having a religious view does not preclude using empiricism. And being an empiricist does not preclude spiritual values. There are many things. What happens after we die? What is good? What is evil? These are things that empirical knowledge cannot really tell you, I think. And so it's fine to have an alternate system in order to have these values. I think in my life, I'm a pragmatist. Take what works. So take the best from column A, take the best from column B, and if they come to conflict, use the one that is most practical. And ask yourself, do I trust the guy who had a vision from God to fly me to Denver, or do I trust the person who studied the practice? Well, I think the answer is pretty clear. But you get to make your own choice. That's what I think about creationism and science.